What's up, everyone? It's your girl, Tammy, aka the Cannabis Cutie, and I'm here today with the lovely May Tao, one of the most knowledgeable women in the cannabis industry. And I also have Susie with me, who runs Humo, Latinas in Cannabis, Mota Glass, just to name a few. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. So happy
Yeah,
to be here. Yeah.
absolutely. And today we're going to talk about all things cannabis and women and laws, like we always do.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Susie, thanks so much for coming. Tammy and I just like to kind of like chat, talk about different topics. And so today I think we're really going to be focusing on some things that I know you're familiar with and that you work with every day. But, just talking about really, I think, being a woman in cannabis, being a Latina, being a minority, what that means, talking about social equity and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, you run a company. Can you tell us a little bit about like what you do and what what your company's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a cannabis entrepreneur and advocate. I feel like when you're an entrepreneur in cannabis, you can't help but to be an advocate. I think
Mhm.
Right.
cannabis is one of those industries where you really have to pick a side in terms of you're either going to move it forward or it's going to be the way it is. So very much an advocate for where the industry and the plant needs to go. So I'm an advocate. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the co-founder and brand partner to UMO. We're California's Mexican American and women-led cannabis brand focused on representing Latino culture. I'm also the co-founder of Mota Glass. We're a leading brand of American-made functional glass, and also Latinas in Cannabis, which is an internationally recognized community focused on empowering Latinas in this industry. So those are a few things that I'm focused on, but all about supporting and empowering Latinos and women in cannabis.
That's so
Amazing.
cool. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your business, is it like a plant touch? Do you have a plant touching company? What do you guys do? You do manufacturing, cultivation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Umo is the plant touching of the three. So we are, basically are the in-house brand of a large farm called Possible. They're in the Salinas Valley. They grow for many brands. And
Mm.
after being in the industry and succeeding, they thought, where are the Latino brands? There weren't that many, representing Latino culture on the shelves. So
Mhm.
they thought, there really is an opportunity to create an authentically Latino brand, but at the same time where they were having those thoughts, I was growing Mota Glass and Latinas in Cannabis, and the community was already asking, well, what's up with the cannabis brand? So I think it was really meant to be where, I had been approached by a few operators to create a brand focused on the Latino community, but it didn't really feel right. But when I met Jesus Burrola, the CEO of Possible, and the rest of the team, it really was meant to be. Our vision is really aligned in terms of the opportunities that cannabis can bring to the Latino community and the minorities as a whole. And we thought, let's do it. And we launched Umo in late 2022. And just a few months ago, we made it to a top 40 brand in California cannabis, which under these conditions, as you know, the cannabis industry is a really difficult industry right now, more than
Yeah.
ever. So to be able to reach that kind of goal, it really speaks to the lack of representation that Latinos have had in this industry. So when we came in strong, authentic, the fans really responded, and they responded with their wallets, and they're supporting the growth of Umo because it's really more than just flower. It's us.
Mhm.
It's letting the industry know we want people like this to win. We want authentically Latino owned, we want Latino grown, and we want woman led.
Mhm.
So it's really been a wonderful to see, this kind of growth in the cannabis industry. But we are focused on growing quality cannabis in Salinas. Salinas is known as the agriculture, center of California. It's known as the salad bowl of the nation. Basically, a lot of great food is grown there, but a lot of great cannabis is as well. And I think that folks really got to acknowledge this area, Salinas. It's largely Latino, led area, and people don't really know that while this stigma exists in Latino community around cannabis, they are growing this and then doing it in such a great way.
I did want to ask you about that because it's like California. We live in California where it's a large Latino population. I think even there's Latinx, there's people that identify with the culture to some extent, or have some roots. So why do you think that, just as recently as, a year or two ago, we were in a place where Latino brands were not necessarily proliferated yet?
Yeah.
And when California is kind of a mature market at this point, I'm just curious why do you have any idea as to why?
Yeah. I think a lot had to align. I think that there are movements outside of the cannabis industry, just as a nation as a whole, kind of skewing more Latino now more than ever. So when you look at politics, the growth of AOC and popularity of AOC, Bad Bunny being the #1 global artist for several years in a row, Latinos in film and media really making a stand and taking a leap and being, having this attention. So there's been a Latino movement as a whole, just globally, in so many industries that, consequentially, in cannabis, we had that rise as well. So it's great to see that. But I think that with the difference between UMO is that we are very representative of the cannabis industry. And I think it really goes to the growth of the cannabis industry. I think there's been a rise in the conscious consumer now more than ever. I think that 2020 played a part in that. I think that when, we first started the interview, we talked about, being a conscious advocate. You're either moving it forward or moving it backwards or not moving it at all. I think consumers are waking up to that as well. And I think you see a lot of conscious consumers who are now asking the questions that they never did 10 years ago. Who grows this? Who owns this? And what's up with the testing? What are the top terpenes, right? Don't even tell me about the THC.
Right.
That kind of consumer is still new. So I think that, to your question, a lot of things were working for us behind the scenes. It's just right now was the best time for it.
It was ripe.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's our
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. That's so cool. I think, it's so interesting the way that we develop these identities around like race or, whatever the identity is, and we choose our products in accordance with that. And I do agree that the consumer is more conscious now. And I like what you said about kind of this growing movement towards Latinos in the limelight more so, or being more generally acceptable. And also as the population demographics change, that's going to influence that as well. How do you, we've had several conversations, Tammy and I've had conversations with many folks in the industry about the concept of social equity. And a lot of times I feel like it's social equity, Black and brown community, those impacted by the war on drugs. But I do feel like, in general, the inquiries or the focus has been more on the African American community. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's what I hear more about. Does social equity, do you think, mean something to you personally or to the Latino community in a comparable sort of manner?
Oh, absolutely. I think that when we fight for equity, we fight for it in the same way that the Black community does. And it's important to remember that, there are a lot of Black people in the Black community is in the Latino community as well. So I think that we are fighting for the same things. We do want to be recognized. We do want the same opportunities in this cannabis industry. I think that especially with regard to social equity programs in the cannabis industry, it's geared towards giving opportunities to those who have been impacted by the war on drugs. So I think in a lot of ways, we are fighting for the same things. I think that when it comes to social equity in the sense of representation, that's where we kind of differ, where we want our culture represented because in a lot of ways it hasn't been. And so when you speak on the demographics of California, we do skew largely Latino. However, because of the stigma, that impacts our ability to really be seen and be represented.
The stigma of cannabis?
Right. So the stigma of cannabis really impacts our ability to go out and advocate for social equity and to say, hey, we want to be seen on the shelves. Well, we don't even want to be seen sometimes, in cannabis with our family and friends. So how are we going to be able to advocate in the same way, when we have a little bit more barriers than others, and that they are cultural.
And what's the stigma in the Latino community for cannabis?
Oh yes, the stigma in the cannabis and the cannabis use in the Latino community is strong because, really, you can be as overachieving as you want. You have a degree, you can do as many great things, but if you're a cannabis consumer, all of that is sometimes wiped away because you're all of a sudden seen as a marihuano, right? You're
a
something,
stoner,
you're a
you're a
stoner, oh, you're
pothead.
labeled as that.
Got
So
it.
that stigma still permeates, and it's something that a lot of entrepreneurs face and battle. It's something that advocates, also battle. We know when in that fight for equity, we have to deal with that as well. Our own community, creating barriers for us. So the stigma, it still exists. I think that's been part of the power of the growth of UMO, is that we are attacking that stigma head on, and we're letting them know, you before you were hiding your identity as a cannabis user. Now there's a brand that you can be proud of, that you can rep, you can wear the sweater and feel like, I am a cannabis user, but I'm also, a lawyer, an advocate, a business person,
Right.
and such.
Yeah.
How do you overcome dealing with the stigma in the community? And what would you say, what part of the community is most stigmatized? Is it the elders, or is it pretty much across the board?
I think that the stigma is just, it's different because as a young person, right, as a youth, you have the stigma of, oh, you're a stoner, you're not going to become anything. You're going to have these barriers to your success, and you're going to not become the adult that you're supposed to. But as an adult, if you're consuming, you have the stigma of you're not being the person you're supposed to be. You're not being a leader for the youth. So I think it's different, but at the end of the day, those barriers the stigma creates, it really affects, mental health at the end of the day, because it leads a lot of Latinos, a lot of minorities to have, a double life sometimes, to have to question their own achievements, whether, they are deserving of the accolades that society says that we are deserving of, but because of this stigma, we have to question ourselves. So the way that we overcome this is by being visible, by people like ourselves having the power of this podcast is doing a lot for it. You as an advocate, you as a business professional. I think that the way that we break down this stigma is by being visible, by having these hard conversations, so that these other people feel seen and feel the self-confidence to go out and start that business, or to go out and start that podcast. And when there is enough of us, we will break down that stigma.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the thing about the double life, it's interesting that you bring that up. Consumers use a double life, but cannabis also in itself has a double life. In the outward, it is demonized as this menace, but really, we've learned scientifically that our bodies are biologically engineered to receive the plant, and that it puts your body into a space of balance, which can help regulate everything else that could be affecting you negatively. So not only do the consumers have a double life, the plant itself has a double life. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really does.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking about like sort of the stereotypical like sort of Latino family gathering, and you wouldn't see cannabis there. You wouldn't necessarily see it in a way, for example, that you might see in like other cultures. Like, my dad's side is from Israel, and in Israel, cannabis is like very widely used and openly used, even though it's not fully legalized yet. And it's just a part of kind of the culture. But I'm thinking about sort of on the other side, like how would you kind of explain to a family member that this is what you're doing, or, what you're involved with? I think that I'm seeing that kind of in a different light now.
Oh yeah, I mean, you would just hide it.
Yeah.
You would just, and it would be this topic of shame too. I know that, coming back to the double life, like I educated Latina, something that was really important to me was to get my education, and I wanted to have a career that my parents could be proud of, but I was a cannabis user, and I felt like it was just a personal disappointment, because I thought I did everything right, but here I am loving this damn plant, here I am getting a relief and happiness from something that, is a disappointment. And so that, I think, is it's an environment. It's something that is not healthy. And I hope that by having these brands and creating sustainable careers in cannabis, that we can help shift that. I think that there are the strongest two things that we can do to break down the stigma is, within the Latino community specifically, is pain management and career opportunities. One, if if most tias out there, if out there, like older women, older Latinas, they won't outwardly smoke with you, but they might take a gummy, right? They might take a little bit of a tincture, and they'll say, "Oh, it's to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Oh, it's for my issue, my arthritis,
My
right?"
inflammation.
That's usually the starting point where they begin to unravel the benefits of cannabis in a way that they're a bit shielded from the stigma, because they say, "Oh, it's because of my pain. It's because of my sleep. It's not me. I didn't want this." So they have that shield. So the second one is career opportunity, right? If your son has a career at a top cannabis brand, and they are in fully corporate, and they are earning that paycheck and doing it in a very in a way that you as a parent should be proud of, right? Then that is the moment where you're thinking, holy crap, like maybe I can be open to it, because look at my child has a 401k. My child has, is growing. That's what I wanted for them. So I think those are the two things that I've observed being so powerful to break down the stigma.
I totally agree with that. And I was sort of reminiscing about one of my first cases as a baby lawyer that I took to trial. And I was petrified. They were each charged with 8 felony counts. This is in like 2015. I'm like 4 months pregnant, and I'm in court. And the way that I broke down the stigma with the jurors was what you said. I put people on the stand who were medical patients talking about the medical relief that this provided. And whereas certain individuals had been addicted to pain pills or opioids or whatever it was. And that was causing not just addiction, but also like physical, sometimes there's blood in their stool or whatever the case may be. And they could authentically testify about how cannabis saved them. You could see the light bulb in the jurors' heads just going like, ding, ding. Okay, this makes sense. The medical path is so persuasive. And then also the second thing you talked about too, careers and opportunities. So, we talked about it, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and due process, and being able to have a career in something that is a legitimate career path. And so we were able to paint that. So what you're saying totally resonates with me. And I feel like that's how cannabis has gotten so much traction over the last 30 years. Is first we talk about the medical path, and then we talk about the career path and the business opportunity. And then obviously there's a social justice aspect, which I think is where social equity kind of comes in. But I do feel like the social equity program is so problematic. And the idea, in my opinion, the idea that the way you're going to cure the harm caused by the war on drugs is by giving people a license to operate a business that they have no knowledge about, no experience about.
No investment.
And they have to compete in a saturated market. It's really just almost like a infant.
It feels like we did it, we tried, they couldn't figure it out. That's not on us.
Yeah.
Which is such a cop out. It's such a cop out. It's, it's frustrating to constantly see this country not want to undo the harms that they've done to so many groups of people in a way that they know can succeed.
At that time, it was presumed that you have a golden ticket if you have a license to operate a cannabis business. And that's just not true. It's turned out to not be true. And okay, California, maybe the ship sailed a little bit, but places like New York or wherever still they're trying to fix it. But I really just think that there's a more holistic approach whereby you're actually helping people in a way that's not a charity, but also is not like, here, like, go run a business. It's just so...
This country is not really interested in making their people better. Like, you have to want that for yourself. Like, they feed us poison. Yeah, they feed us poison. They poison our air, our water. Like, they're not interested in making great citizens so that we're a great country that can compete on a global scale, which is what we're seeing now. The ramifications of keeping your people unhealthy, unable to afford education, healthcare. Those are all things that are affecting us. And we're, of course, seeing it in cannabis. And, even in states that come online, these new growers can't figure out how to grow their cannabis and pass the testing. So they change the rules so that Timmy and Johnny can play. Not knowing that, the people in California have figured this out a long time ago. If you would just pay them what they deserve instead of trying to save money by getting a new grower and paying him $100,000, and we'll just figure it out in a couple of years. And then at the, patients who are paying for medicine now have medicine that could make them sick. So, when you're not putting the systems around the people, especially people harmed by the war on drugs who probably were not able to get a certain type of education. They need the acumen to run a business, not just any business. This is one of the hardest, most complex industries on planet Earth with so much regulation and red tape. First, we need to figure out how to just run a business, let alone this one here, where you could easily lose your license quickly and then, or get your company stolen. There's so many social equity candidates that signed their companies over in their operating agreement and did not know. So, gosh, I'm not a fan of social equity.
It's like a facade. It's like you want it, right? Like it sounds good.
It sounds amazing.
And then the red tape, that part that got me, because it's industry. It looks like this playing field, right? Of this, like you read the press and you're like, oh, gotta get into cannabis, right? Like that's where it's at.
The gold rush,
the green rush, right? And then you're in and you're like, wow, is it possible to succeed? And who's meant to succeed here? Who are the rules made for? And I think that when we acknowledge our power as people, as consumers, that's when we flip the script. Because at the end of the day, numbers don't lie. And if you are a conscious consumer, you can change the game.
Right.
So this is where podcasts like this, when we can educate folks and they can listen and remember that they are the ones that have the power, we can change the industry. But I think it's going to be people having the courage to be visible.
Yeah, I think it's so tough. Like I look at the California market and, I've been in it for a really long time as a lawyer, but also more than a lawyer because I see these people from like day one, they're entrepreneurs or they want to, they did want to buy their ticket to the green rush, and to see them all like struggling right now and trying to figure out how to make it work. And then you add like social equity to the already complicated puzzle. It's doomed.
I mean, were we meant to succeed? I feel people think there's so much money to be made in cannabis, but that's because you didn't have overhead costs. You didn't have insurance. You didn't have security. You didn't have taxes. You didn't have all of these expenses that come with operating a legal cannabis business. So yeah, when the market was prohibited, the reason why the prices were so high was because you didn't know how much supply was actually on hand. So prohibition is what caused those prices to be so high. But now that we're legal and we don't get tax deductions and you have to have security on guard at all times and you have to have armored guards to move your money and you need to have security whenever you go pay your taxes in cash, there's not much left to be made at the end of the day. So I think really what we're in for is a reckoning of, well, now that we know how much we have in supply, we can't gouge the prices the way that we used to when it was illegal. And that's just the reality of the situation. And honestly, I'd love to see it sold like how cilantro and all other herbs and plants are sold at a store where you can smell them and inspect them and touch them and decide if you want to purchase it from there with the understanding that it is a plant. Yeah. And that's it.
Yeah. And that feeling of like seeing it among other goods. I got that feeling when I was at the California State Fair last year. UMO won 2 gold awards for that, for our sativas. But you go there and it's wine, it's cheese, and then it's cannabis. And I hadn't felt that feeling in a long time. And to go up there, and it just started last year, the whole like competition, and it's science based. So no judges kind of like, oh, I've seen your brand. Straight up testing, which is beautiful to see, very honest. But I just loved how they elevated cannabis to a good that deserves to be like among other farmed goods.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's what it deserves.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the other thing you're talking about with the industry is that they can't transport to other states.
No, interstate
legally.
commerce.
So, I mean, I talked to a metric specialist this morning on this like client matter, and he told me that 100 out of 100 growers are leaking that product out.
Of course.
And so,
listen, the new regulations don't stop what was already happening. That's the part that, regulators and lawmakers need to understand. That fire smoke that you're smoking in New York, in Florida, did not come from your state. It came from California. Like just straight up.
70% of it.
Yes.
Yeah, 70% of it.
That's part of their marketing too.
Right.
There are times where it's not maybe it's not from California, but they'll say it just because of marketing.
Exactly.
So it's
got that Cali.
That I've heard that in New
Exactly.
York for sure.
Yeah, and if they don't open up that interstate commerce, it's just going to become a huge gray. It already is, but it's going to become an even bigger gray market that they're not going to be able to put the stop on. And it's history repeating itself over and over again. It's like I have colleagues all over the country, all over the world that go through the legalization process, and it's like a script. It's like a rerun over and over again. Like it's the California rerun.
Oh God.
It's like,
Groundhog Day in cannabis.
Exactly. And it's like, okay, well, this is going to happen on a national level and then an international level because we're just not regulating or doing it properly, or over regulating it and creating, and then creating this like barrier to natural capitalism.
Right.
Well, part of it is the people who are making the laws don't understand the plant. They don't understand the industry. So like you have states that will, certain THC percentages have different prices. And it's like, you really don't know what you're doing here, like at all. That's so, I've smelled cannabis that has no scent. It could have been 31% THC, but I guarantee you it's taking
the
you
cardboard terp.
Yeah, it's taking you nowhere. Yeah, so I mean, that's part of the problem. It's the people who are in charge with regulating the industry have not a clue on how it should be ran. And their ego and their pride wants them to believe that, this needs to be like any other industry and we need to tax it because it makes so much money. But again, like the money was made because you didn't have insurance and rent and employees and insurance and all the other things. So, gosh. Yeah.
Well, just having been a part of the legalization movement and also the movement for regulations, like meeting with city council members or other politicians, the way that legalization was sold and continues to be sold to lawmakers is that we're going to get tax revenue.
Right.
So it's really just, that's the only sort of language sometimes that those policymakers and those lawmakers understand.
Right.
And so that's what cannabis promised.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the deal with the devil a little bit.
Yeah.
I know that today they're considering a bill on removing the compound tax issue.
Okay.
So SB 512 would essentially remove the so like if you buy cannabis for $100 and the sales tax is 10%, so it's $110, you're then paying excise tax 15% on 110.
Yep.
And then, so it's compound taxes. And so at least they're reducing that. But in general, it's literally impossible to survive in the cannabis market.
Yeah.
Because of the regulations and the taxation and the lack of interstate commerce. So I do think that there is the ability for folks to turn a profit, but they're just being squashed by the tax structure, the regulations.
Yep.
And, and then entrepreneurs and business people are going to do what they're going to do to survive.
Exactly. I mean, that's essentially Black and brown communities. Like I hear so much political discourse about, well, those people just need to stop doing crime. And it's like, have you ever lived in a situation where you were in survival mode?
Right.
You're going to do whatever it takes to survive, especially if you have children. And that's where a lot of cannabis entrepreneurs are today. Like, listen, I'm doing everything that I can to play by the book, and homie down the street doesn't even have a license and he's killing it. So why should I keep playing this game with the government when you guys are screwing me? Like, I've literally lost everything trying to play by the rules, and homie down the street said I'm not playing by the rules and he's still good. So of course you're incentivizing the black market to continue to operate and be lucrative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and
Mhm.
sometimes following the rules feels illegal too. You're like,
Yeah.
this is not possible.
You're being legally
right.
robbed. You're
That
being
part.
legally robbed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
It
Yeah.
feels like that. But the misconceptions of what it is to co-found a brand in cannabis is just it's interesting because there are folks that see the rise of Umo and they think, oh, you guys are like rolling in
You're
the
killing
dough.
it.
You
Yeah.
guys are just
Mhm.
doing this, and they don't know about all the taxes or the fact that when you're a brand in cannabis, to get into a store, we want to celebrate, but the work begins because we have to make sure that we're a retail partner to support sell through. What do you have to do for that? You have to do events. You have to give free product away. You have to swag out everybody and their moms and their dogs and say, everybody got to show love to the bud tender so they remember you, because there's 47 brands on that shelf and they got to remember you when someone is. So there's so much behind it, to where, say you're a small social equity brand that has this much to play with when it comes to marketing, and then a retail partner is like, well, we need you to come with this kind of marketing. And what do you do? Where do you pull it? Donde la saco? Like, where do I do it? Where do I pull it out from? So I think that a lot of marketers are starting to, this is the dig deep time, this extinction event that we are undergoing right now in the cannabis industry for brands. It's forcing everyone to dig deeper. I don't think that you can really have high quality cannabis and a good logo and be like, they're going to buy it, guys. I
Yeah.
think we're good. It is now the time where we have to dig deeper and really know your consumer, come authentic, come correct, and know what moves them to make that purchase. And I think it's not the way it was before. And you're going to continue seeing brands that continue to struggle with that fail. I think that the stakes are higher, to where in the back in the day, when you could afford these mistakes and think, oh, I'm gonna learn my customer in a couple years and then we're gonna stop wasting money.
Yeah.
Now you better get there quicker. You better know your people and make sure that your money is stretching. I can tell you that with Umo, we have a brilliant team of folks that are looking at every dollar coming in and every dollar coming out. And I can tell you that the marketing team that I'm leading is slim, and we're authentic, and we're to the point, because no bullshit time.
Yeah. And I think generally in the market that's true overall, not just cannabis. I think that people are, there's tough economic times. We're feeling a squeeze a little bit, and it's going to continue ahead for a few years.
Yep.
And, the boom that we experienced probably from, I know my legal career, I would say between 2014 and 2021, that was like kind of the big bubble, right? And at least for cannabis. And I think that, I don't know if it's popped or burst or if it's just a correction, but I think we are in for some tough times.
Yeah.
But I think that if you're an astute entrepreneur, business person, have a solid brand, I think that you can succeed. But I do think that there's pressure to be national too.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel that pressure to be in other states?
Yeah. People ask me all the time about New York, and they're like, well, when's Umo coming to New York? And I'm like, well, keeping an eye on that market. I, don't think we want to do that yet. Mota Glass is in New York. So we do have a presence there. But for Umo, these guidelines of not being able to transport really hurt us, because there are a lot of areas where I think Umo would do well, but we have to consider finding a partner there that can help us with fulfillment. And then at that point, we have to take it, step by step. But I think that Umo will be national when the time is right. I'm looking at all these barriers that we face, but ultimately it's great to see the fan support of people asking for us. So that's been our guiding light.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Amazing.
What do you think about being like a woman in cannabis and an entrepreneur as a female? Do you think that it presents like significant challenges?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's preaching to the choir, I'm sure, but I can say that it has been a battle. I think from the start, because there are battles people see, and there are those that people don't. And I think that the battles that people do see are the ones where maybe we're not taken seriously from the get go. I don't know what it is, but as soon as we're in the room, it's like, do you really know what you're talking about? Though I think that is something that all women face when they first join the industry, because joining the cannabis industry is twofold. You have to be professional in the boardroom, but then there's an added layer of kind of coolness that people feel out. They want to feel out whether you do know the plant, whether you can tell an OG, whether you know what a terp is, whether you're going to be that person that's always asking about THC content and then you're that guy. There's that level of, I think, not quite cattiness, but I think it's like a personality check that cannabis professionals do that other industries I haven't seen, where it's just all dry, all professional. So there's an added layer of that. I think that pushed me to create the Susie Greens Instagram account, because I have multiple social media accounts. I have my main Susie Placencia one, if you were to follow me there. But I created Susie Greens because of that pushback that I got in the cannabis industry when I first started. I would talk about my professionalism, and I've had nearly now over a decade of marketing experience. I have a master's degree from USC. Nobody cares about that in cannabis. It's all about, well, what brands have you worked with? What have you done? That kind of stuff. So I would constantly be talking about like what I have done, but they're like, what's on social media though? Are you at the events? Are you doing that? I'm like, all right, let's do it. And the nickname Susie Greens is actually a very authentic nickname that was given to me when I was younger. I was always a heavy cannabis user, and I was always in the groups with like my guy friends smoking the blunts, right? And because I was the one girl on the rotation, they would be like, "Oh, give her greens." So it was the Susie Greens became the nick. Yeah, it became a nickname that kind of stuck. And when I created like a cannabis profile, I'm like, well, that's the most authentic nickname that I have. And I started it, and I think it's more of a peek into like my cannabis lifestyle. But what it's become is honestly my more authentic self, because I think that Susie Placencia is the polished person that like I want to put out there in the world. But Susie Greens is the one that is in the industry and dealing with the ups and downs of that, and in the trenches with all of my fellow professionals in here. So I think that has been, it's still, an interesting journey being a woman in cannabis, because there are different hats we have to constantly wear, and then there's that added layer of my family and culture, and like I'm visible to the supporters and to my retail partners, but am I visible to my tia or my tios when they ask about, what's going on your Instagram? You're talking about you're smoking bongs, like what's going on there? But I think that, what keeps me going is knowing that there are so many other women that are on the same boat, and knowing that community is what ties us together. And I just look forward to always meeting new women in cannabis and getting to know their journey, and grounding myself in their experiences as well, to know that I'm not alone.
Nice. Yeah, I do. I think there is that like cred check, like to make sure that you know what you're talking about. I think that's probably also because there are so many kind of scammers in cannabis.
Absolutely.
Like I screen the heck out of my calls and emails because, oh my gosh, like everybody and their mother knows everything, and like I even feel like sometimes for my clients, I serve as like a scam check. Like they'll put me in contact with the person that says that they can get them credit card processing or whatever, whatever the like proposed kind of situation is. And I'm like one of the most cynical people in the world, so I'm like very skeptical of what you're talking about, but I do see that. And I think that like I can tell when I meet people initially, there's a lot of that skepticism, and then they start to learn that I've been in it for a really long time and been in federal court defending people accused, and then they start to like soften.
Exactly. I mean,
and they said, but it's
not trustworthy. This industry for a long time, people were making their living and operating in the background, especially Northern California, where, you have entire towns that, Reynolds can't understand why their turkey bags are doing numbers in this small town. Like, what is going on? They could never figure it out. And the people are not going to tell. So yeah, that cred check, I feel like is valid. I mean, I want to know as well, because the one thing that I cannot stand is people in this industry who grow but don't consume. Like, how do you know? That's like saying you cooked dinner, but you didn't taste any of it and then you served it to me. What? Like, I need you to make sure that you know what you're doing. So yeah, I love hearing that you get a cred check, but I am shocked to hear that people don't care that you have a master's degree from USC.
Honestly, there are times where that not quite worked against me, but they're like, oh, you're a suit, because they always want to put you in a box where you're either a suit or you're a community advocate, or like a, person from the community who came from the ground up. Well, I don't know why I can't be both. Like I before I even went to college, I was a bud tender. I was a bud tender at a trap shop. And I before then I sold, it was with my dad at the swap meets. My dad's a hood doctor. So my dad always used herbs and medicines growing up, but we went to the botanicas, which is kind of like the like neighborhood kind of like herbal shops, so to speak, right? So we would go to the swap meet, and I'd started slanging there, understanding how to sell at the community level, from how telling people what these herbs were about. Let me tell you about picot. Shout out to people who know what picot and all these like weird Mexican remedies for things. El noni, that was a big thing for a while in the early 2000s in the Latino community. It was this brown liquid that people would drink, and they would be like, this cures everything, and it was like an herbal mixture. And I was out there slanging that, and I think that when I got into the cannabis industry as a bud tender, I saw it in the same way, where these are natural herbs and then treating, kind of helping patients. So it was a natural transition. And then I ended up, doing my professional journey, but I feel like a part of me never really left where I was as a bud tender. And I feel like now with Umo, in a lot of the ways, I'm still that bud tender where I want to understand the plant so I can better prescribe something that's going to help you. Or I want to learn about your journey so I can find a strain that really matches your vibe right now, because you may be different later. So I think that that special touch is what has helped people really understand Umo as a people's brand, and not this kind of this idea. Because I do bud tender trainings in person, because it's more meaningful to me, because I want them to know that their role is so important in the cannabis industry. And if they only knew that they were actually some of the most important people in this industry. And when I was a bud tender, I didn't receive that mentorship or even that seriousness that it was a real career path to me. And I didn't take it seriously either. I just kind of chose it as like, oh, this is where I'm doing now, but I'm going to be moving on. But if I thought, what if I had that mentorship as a bud tender? Could I have become like a GM, or like, stayed in the cannabis industry and continued my career journey within the cannabis industry? It didn't happen to me that way, but when I do my bud tender trainings, I let the bud tenders know there is so much for you to do in this industry. If you want it, you can absolutely go from bud tender to co-founder and brand partner of a large company. Amazing. You can absolutely do this. And, and so that's really important to me. But also I let them know the tips and tricks of how to sell Umo, because I'm still a bud tender in a lot of ways. So it's really great to see that kind of love from bud tenders. Shout out to all the bud tenders out there. You are important, and there's a lot to do in this industry. And just so much respect.
Okay, just to kind of like play this out, I do feel like some bud tenders just don't know what the heck is going on. And it could be a lack of training, but sometimes I've walked into some of the bigger stores and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for this. And it's just like
daytime or nighttime.
Yeah, like there's like no real education, no real understanding. Also, like the crop of people that are coming into that employment, it's it can almost be like a fast food job almost, but like they're stoned all the time. So it's like I smoke, I support the plant. I think I think that there's a real conversation that needs to be had about like time, place, and manner for smoking cannabis. And like if I'm showing up to the dispensary and you're just ripped out of your mind and you can't like talk to me straight, that's not okay. I don't care how much we love the plant, support the plant, it's not okay.
Oh yeah.
There's a shift in bud tender culture, because you went from like trap shops where they're hiring pretty girls who have their breasts out, like I don't want to buy cannabis from somebody just because they're hot. So we still kind of are seeing that where it's like daytime or nighttime. And then to dispensaries who
or the
are like
trade shows. Oh my
right. To now you have dispensaries that are operating like medical facilities who you can't hit the floor until you complete this training. You're not going to be able to hit the floor until you have a full understanding of the endocannabinoid system and you understand that, you know, the sativa indica binary is a myth. And you're the first line of defense for, you know, these customers can't go to their doctors. They can't say, hey, what do I take for my arthritis? So your bud tender is going to be your best bet. So they are the most underrated players in the industry. Your product is going to go through them first. So if you take care of them in a very genuine and meaningful way, really try to educate them on the product, they're your salesperson for your company. But again, you still have a lot of bad players who, and a lot of corporate shops are not really training, in California at least, they're not really training their employees on the endocannabinoid system. They're trying to move product and make money, and that's their only concern. So.
Right. Yeah. That's why I think that one of the smart things that brands can do is, so brands do the training for the bud tenders when you get into the shop, and we have to do every 2 to 3 months, right? Mm-hmm. I think that if brands get a little smarter of including that kind of, you know, knowledge or that kind of, you know, education in their own brand decks, we can actually end up training the bud tenders as a whole on just cannabis. Mm-hmm. So for example, like for part of my training with UMO, we talk about terpene a lot and terpene expression and how, because we do mixed light, the difference between indoor, mixed light, and outdoor, and how that helps with terpene expression. So those are things that we, like you mentioned, we can't kind of rely on the fact that they're going to be getting that training elsewhere. So we're going to make sure that we do that on our end. Mm-hmm. But yeah, some of the bud tenders are really gems, stars, educators. Yeah. They are going to be the next blank, blank, blank. But there are some who maybe don't feel like they've kind of had that spark or whatever motivation to make them really explore this industry. And I think that that's, you know, it's going to come or it may not. But I think that that's where you see the ones that are going to rise to the top. And I think this industry has a lot of really great former bud tenders who are now GMs, who are now buyers, and you can see their experience in it because they're looking at the flower and they're actually breaking it apart and they're asking those questions that other people aren't. And it's because they were a former bud tender. Mm-hmm. So I'm really excited for those gems.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So what is like something that consumers generally are looking for, and how would you kind of advise them on what products they should be trying out?
Yeah, I think that a lot more people are coming in and asking about different flavors than the usual. I think that sometimes as a brand, we have to make sure that we're putting out products that's going to sell. So as much as I may love a strain and think, oh, I want this, it's got to be what the data shows that's moving. So sometimes you see a lot of gas sweet candy right now. Everywhere, sweet candy gas. It's the same flavor profile. But sometimes the consumer is starting to ask for more, and that allows for the brands to come out with those strains, because we just are not able to, especially in this market, to take a gamble and for me to put out a strain that the data doesn't show that it's going to be successful. So a lot of the time the consumer is really the ones driving that. So, you know,
but why would they ask for like gas sweet candy? Why is that?
That's just something that's really popular right now in terms of the flavor profile. Okay. So that's something regards to that. Also, the terpene expression does impact the feeling and whatever, you know, impact.
Our consumers are getting smarter. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we're done with the sativa indica. I swear 1 in 2 people do not like citrus terps. So now they're understanding the smell. My nose knows I like whenever something smells like this because my body reacts like this. Yeah. So it is so lovely to hear consumers saying, no, I want this smell.
Garlic.
Because
that's particularly a flavor that people will ask for. Like, where are the GMOs? I want the garlic.
Right. And what impact does the garlic supposedly have as far as from a psychoactive perspective?
Yeah, well, it can awaken certain feelings on certain, you know, certain terpenes will activate, you know, certain feelings. So it just really comes down to what they're looking for.
Yeah.
You know, so,
and their biochemistry.
Yes,
because
exactly.
Me and my best friend can both smoke something gassy and have 2 different reactions. Same thing if it's citrusy.
Really, so a gassy reaction.
Yeah, like something that smells like ethanol or,
Yeah.
Yes.
you know,
Like a
that
fume
it
smell.
smells like gasoline.
Mhm.
That's what I personally like. But if I give that to my best friend, she's comatose for the next 3 hours. So it's
That's
Mhm.
that,
funny.
you know, it's that bio, you know, just that biology. Everybody is so
Yes.
different, which is why I think cannabis companies need to stop telling consumers how it's going to make them feel,
Yeah.
because you can say this almond milk is going to make you feel so much better than whole milk. But in actuality, if I have an almond allergy, I'm in the hospital. So you can't tell me I'm going to feel a certain way. You don't know my biochemistry. Same thing with cannabis strains. Stop saying it's nighttime or daytime. Stop telling people how it's going to make them feel. Tell them how it smells. That is like the biggest indicator that I can give you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to invite folks to the dispensaries so they can experience, you know, the flower and have bud tenders that are educated enough to point them at the flower that's going to help them, you know?
Yeah.
I also feel like for flower, for me personally, the texture is really important.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like anything. I also roll joints generally, so I don't like anything too moist, but
Mhm.
also I don't like it when it's so dry and like crunchy.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
I hate
falls
that.
apart.
Yeah.
I
You don't
got-
need a grinder. You just
Yeah,
kinda,
I got some of that the other day, and I was like, "This is crap. This is junk."
Yeah.
You know, you want it to like just fall. Like for
Yeah.
me, the sensation of the like the bud and how you break it apart
Yeah.
tells me a lot.
Oh, yeah. There's so many factors to look for when you're purchasing cannabis. Age matters. So when you're walking into a dispensary, tell me about your products that were just harvested, because what you're describing is something that's probably been sitting on the shelf for 6 months to a year. And
Ooh.
I've had companies gift me flour,
That's
and
when
when
I
I
get
look
gifted.
on
That's
the
when I got
date, I'm
gifted.
like, this
Oh
was
my god, I'm gonna go look at my
That's
trash.
likely
fall,
probably
and
why they
it's-
gifted it.
yeah, I'm like,
Yeah.
this was harvested
Yeah.
over a year ago, and you
Yeah.
gave this to me?
Yeah.
Like, whoa.
Yeah, and it says on the package. I didn't even think about that.
And yeah, so look at the date. How a company cures cannabis matters. What you said, too moist, maybe they didn't cure it properly. So it may not burn or smoke well. It might be a little bit harsh. How they store it matters as well. You ideally want a dark glass jar. That's going to preserve it the best. And then the scents, again, double down on the scent. Say, hey, I really like the way gelato smells, or I really like the way an OG smells. And I really don't like anything that smells like piss, breath, or oranges. Like, really be
Yeah.
specific,
Yeah.
because that's going to help your bud tenders. Like, oh, yeah, perfect. I got
So
it.
what would like
Yeah.
Blue Dream be? Do we know? Off the top of our heads?
Like,
We could probably Google it.
it's categorized as a sativa. I know that.
It has a
Right.
little citrus to it.
It's got some linalool, too.
Yeah, it's not too
Yeah.
strong like an orange,
Yeah.
like an orange that vibe. But
It's too orangey for me.
yeah, I could
Yeah.
see that. We do have a Blue Dream as a cross for our Crema Naranja strain, which is part of our Reserva line for Humo. And that one you can feel the Blue Dream in it.
Mhm.
The Blue Dream is such a like legendary strain. It's
Yeah,
one of
it
those that
is.
I remember from way back
Yeah.
in the day.
That one
And-
and White
Widow.
Widow.
Oh,
White
yeah,
Widow,
yeah,
my
yeah.
favorite. Like,
Yes, I mean those are just like legendary. Green
Yeah.
Crack, all those like
Yeah.
you just you don't hear that often anymore.
Yeah.
But Blue Dream in particular, like I think that, you know, coming back to like everything affecting you a particular way because of your own endocannabinoid system, I feel that Blue Dream for me is a really good focused working strain. And anytime that I know Blue Dream is in it or around there, I can feel good about it. So I think that, you know, I encourage patients to have a cannabis journal
Yes.
if they are consuming specifically medicinally or, you know, for whatever purpose that makes you want to like remember that. I definitely started one, and I know that I like stuff with Northern Lights cross. That's
Oh.
something that particularly I really like. The terpene osmine is something that I've started to really focus on, and
Mhm.
especially I talked to Liz here at Busy about just my journaling with menstrual cramps, because I never really used to get any kind of discomfort. I was just, I guess, blessed in that way.
Yeah, same.
Never ever. And then within the last like year or so, it just like started, and I was like, oh no, what is this?
It
and I
sucks.
noticed, yeah, I'm like, oh, that's terrible. But I noticed that, you know, specific strains do help ease with that. And so that has been something that, you know, it's specific to me. You're right. I can't really prescribe that. I can't say, oh, you should take that.
Correct.
You know?
Yeah. I can never recommend strains, and journaling like you said, you have to play your own doctor. And if you think it's too hard, like, you know how you react on vodka, you know how you react on dark liquor, you can figure it out for your cannabis too. You just have to be very intentional and conscious about it. Yeah.
I always go for the tequila.
Correct. Because you know how you're going to react. Exactly. Same thing with your cannabis. You want to know, how are you feeling before you consume? How do you feel while you're consuming, and then after, and then maybe a couple of hours after? That is exactly how I figured out anything citrus is not good. And then terpinolene will put me in a coma so fast. I don't know what it is about that terp. It's not even a dominant terpene, but I'm so sensitive to it as well.
Wow.
So yeah, journal, play doctor, because until doctors are allowed to play doctor in this industry, you have to know your body and how you react the best.
But then there are people that are like just kind of occasional users,
right,
who are just looking for that giggly or that good feeling, and that's like really hard.
Go for the stuff that's older. I would say like the companies that are growing mids on purpose and like the stuff that has been sitting on the shelf longer, give that to your new curious consumers that cannot handle like everything smells the same to them. Well, then give them the stuff that might be a little bit older, that isn't going to completely knock them over. Because I have sent a friend into one of the big box stores, and they called me because they wanted to go to the hospital from a joint. And I was like, wow, you gave them one of the strongest brands that you had in house because you're just worried about commission, not thinking about this person doesn't smoke ever.
Yeah.
They needed something that was possibly sun grown, one of the lower quality brands, or older, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sometimes folks really just think, oh, I'm going to get this person as faded as possible and think that it's a positive thing. Yeah. I think one of the dangers of doing that is you can actually deter someone from cannabis completely.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the really damaging things of that approach, and really a truly disappointing thing that I've seen within the Latino community actually as well. There are a lot of just fellow people that I know that have said, oh, I can't do cannabis though, because one time 10 years ago I had a bad episode. And I'm like, well, first of all, like that's not really fair, because you don't know what you smoked. You don't know if it was laced with something else. Yeah. And then you're putting a whole perception on a plant and an industry and a whole community based on your inability to actually be cognizant of what you're taking in.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel that way about mushrooms. So I've taken mushrooms probably like 5 times in my life. Never had a good experience. I mean, I've had glimpses of like what we're talking about, but it's like the whole trip is packaged together with like some really dark moments.
Yeah.
And so, when I see the psilocybin industry now starting to proliferate, I'm really excited about it. And I can understand from a cannabis perspective, like, maybe I didn't know those times, like I certainly probably overdosed. I probably took too much. Right. I probably was not in the right environment. I didn't know where it was coming from, right? So like all of those experiences are really important to kind of understand that we're working against ourselves if we don't educate the consumer.
Right.
Whether it's mushrooms or cannabis or whatever it is, right? So I really like, what's emerging in the psilocybin industry as far as like these guided practices, which is really interesting. I know it's like a completely different substance, but, I think that cannabis is also a much more complicated plant, right? We have all of these cannabinoids and all of these molecules, and it's so different. And depending on what you're actually consuming could be totally different, whether it's Delta 8, Delta 9, right? That's one thing to consider, whether it's, what the profile is from a terpene perspective. Yeah. It's so complicated.
Well, I mean, it's also not for everybody. That's just the reality of it. Like there are people who have really bad trips with cannabis because they could potentially have a predisposition to schizophrenia or some kind of mental health issue that's exacerbated by cannabis. Alcohol is not for everybody. I personally don't think it's for my body type. I get really sick. It's never fun. So yeah, just it just may not be for somebody. But to your point, like, don't demonize something just because it doesn't work for you,
Mhm.
which is what this country is all about. If it doesn't make sense for them, then it's just wrong.
One of the things I personally just dislike is when people say I used to smoke cannabis, but now I'm living a healthier lifestyle. And it's
Mhm.
like, first of all, like, great for you, but for you to just put that under
Well, yeah,
the
there's
same...
instances. Charlotte Figge, without cannabis, her life would have ended much sooner. I have a friend, Miko. Her son was supposed to pass away at 9, and she prolonged his life till he was 18. So this whole, it's a healthier lifestyle without it. Well, for some people, it's a death sentence without it. So to each its own. Judging cannabis is like so 1960s, 70s, 80s. Like, let's leave it in the past. Like, if you have a drink in your hand at 5 o'clock after work or on the weekends, you really have no room to judge what people decide to do with their own bodies. Whether you agree with it or not, it literally does not affect you. So that's, I think, one of the issues with cannabis. People who are exiting cannabis too still have grace for those that still need to use the plant for, they're still not in homeostasis. Congratulations to you. But let's not slam everybody else just because you're on a different wavelength now.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course. Personally, that is something that I've heard, especially when folks say, oh, you still smoke cannabis. I used to in college, but I graduated from that, or I
cirrhosis of the liver in 50,
right,
in 30
and
years.
like, I got more mature and moved on with my life, and I feel like those kinds of things, they just give a window into like their perspectives on it, not necessarily others.
Well, that's their shame being projected outward towards their use. There was still some shame and unfortunately probably bad feelings around their use, and they feel free from it, and congratulations to you. But there's a lot of people that cannot, go on without it, and that's their business. Yeah, that's their business.
So true. Oh man.
It's interesting. I feel like personally with my cannabis journey, I go through phases.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like heavier, sometimes it's lighter. And I personally find that it helps me in many ways. Even like you said, like even at work, it can be very focusing, and then there are other times where it's like, there's no way that I could be under the influence right now because of what I'm doing, but like if I have to write a motion or an argument or something like that, and I've got time on my side, I can really put something together that's persuasive and strong and makes sense when I'm elevated in my consciousness.
Yeah.
And, I discovered that for the first time I was writing like a motion for a criminal case. And I just remember like ta 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 on the computer, and like afterwards looking at it and be like, wow, that's
I did that.
Yeah. So I think, just don't judge other folks. Before we wrap up, I did kind of want to talk a little bit more about kind of what we can do as a community of women to empower others. And as a businesswoman, we talked a little bit about some of the prejudices that we feel. And I totally echo what you're talking about. I'll never forget, walking into this boardroom once a week for this trade association that I represented. And there were 14 men around the table. And then there was me. And I always had to make it a point to be heard. I always had to make sure that they knew that I was there.
Yeah.
And I always tell young women or older, whoever, entrepreneurs, whoever, that's really important, because sitting silent and making yourself small is exactly the opposite of what you need to be doing, and move the ball forward. Like I grew up with brothers and a large male community, and knowing that I had to like elbow my way into everything to be heard, I think really serves me in this context, in the sense that, don't be afraid to speak up. You're a smart, competent individual, and you need to be heard, because it's like, I just remember, this happens to me all the time too. It's like I'm always on conference calls and it's like 20 dudes and me, you know what I mean? And I'm like running the call, you know? You just have to really, put that forward. So I was just curious, kind of like any advice that you guys have for entrepreneurs who might be facing in cannabis or elsewhere that kind of like similar experience, what you would recommend to them?
Yeah, I think definitely not being afraid and to speak up is really helpful. But I think sometimes, preparation for that as well, because sometimes it can really be easy to get caught up with emotions and to think this is the time where I'm going to speak up.
Oh,
Well,
yes.
Make sure that when you do speak up, you are prepared for it, so that when that time comes,
Yep.
you can really make the most out of it. I think that a lot of women, we have these preconceived notions about us. When something goes wrong and we want to speak up, oh, it's because we're being problematic or we are emotional. So I think that we have to be very aware of these preconceived notions that are outside of our control, and make sure that we are addressing them in our moment to shine. So I think particularly women of color, we have a lot of misconceptions about us being difficult women, about not being a culture fit. When something goes wrong and we have to be the ones to speak out on it, why is it that we are the ones that having to speak out on it? And then it kind of harms our ability to do so, because we don't want to be a stereotype. And then we're having to battle that aspect. So I think that, yes, have the courage to speak out, but know that when you do speak out, it's gonna it's gonna mean more, because
It's going to be amplified.
Yes, exactly.
It's going to be amplified. Men have more of the luxury of saying dumb things. Yeah. Or combative things, or what they say is just something that's said and listened to, but what you're saying is sticking to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think as a woman in a male-dominated space, you need to know your purpose. If you know that, you can say whatever. And, there is this conception that women are emotional, but men are very, very emotional. Women, we get emotional, but we don't go shoot people after we're emotional. Like, men are extremely emotionally volatile. And I grew up like you. I have a lot of brothers. I was the girl. As long as I can go in there with purpose, ask the right questions, men get so intimidated so quick that they eventually
They do.
Now you're on their level.
Yeah.
Now ask the right questions, know your purpose, be very intentional and serious about it, and go from there. Now, when it comes to like being sexualized and objectified, I'm not working with you anymore. And at some point you're going to regret this decision, but I don't tolerate that at all. I don't have any space for it at all. And then I surround myself around men who will protect me and be my ally, who will say, hey, I know you want to work with this guy, but here's what he says about you. And then, immediately red flags. And then, that comes to show out that was a red flag type of guy who has a history of doing these types of behaviors. So control what you can control. That is not men. That is yourself, your intention, how you move, how you walk. Carry yourself with respect. Don't give them anything to talk about if you don't want them talking about you. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And like, how do you react if someone like sort of comments on your appearance in conjunction with like a business or professional? Because I think there's a certain amount of that men do feel is like complimentary. And now there's like this like idea that like, oh, I can't say anything now.
Yeah.
But there is I've had it throughout my career. I'm sure you both have had it as well, where it's like that moment where it's like, did he just say that? Like, okay, breathe. Like, how am I gonna react?
I don't. That's the thing. I give them nothing. There's no reaction. There's no negative reaction, no positive reaction. I didn't hear it. Eventually it stops.
Unacknowledged.
Yeah. But I think, especially like I've noticed as a boss, if I have employees and they're being subjected to that, I do feel like I have to say something.
That's like, a whole different perspective.
It's like you have to, because especially for a younger woman, even if they're an attorney or a professional, there's a frozen moment. And I think that frozen moment sometimes passes without comment or acknowledgement, and that can just sort of allow it to continue to a certain extent. And every situation is case by case, obviously. And like an offhanded, like, oh, you look nice is different like than, other comments. But it's something that, I think women in business should kind of be prepared for and know some tools that they can use if it's getting like to a point that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Like your safety is the most important thing, 100%. And if you find yourself in environments where you're constantly unsafe, then that's something that as a woman, like you need to be able to kind of decide, is this worth my well-being? Am I at risk of being harmed or hurt or made to feel a certain type of way? So that's also kind of something that's unfortunately on our backs that we have to do as well, because these men, unfortunately, a lot of them don't have any consequences for this bad behavior. So you kind of have to take it into your own hands and say, I'm just not going to consult for you anymore. I'm not working with you anymore. And kind of be done with it. It's not that easy for everyone, unfortunately, but yeah, I didn't even think about it from your perspective as a boss. Like, what do you do? Yeah, I run as a free agent, so I can exit stage left whenever I need to.
Or even like I have these sort of like memories of walking into a courthouse, in my business suit, but all of the lawyers across the bar are male, older, white, and like there's just so much pressure in that moment. The judge, like looking at me like I'm some dumb young lawyer that doesn't know what they're talking about. And even I've gone to jails and visited clients who are incarcerated. And I'll never forget one time, I'm so dumb. Like, why would I do this? But I showed up in a suit, but it was shorts and a jacket. I was wearing heels. And I mean,
I can imagine. I've seen that montage on TV shows and movies all day. Yeah. Oh man. It's interesting because there are times, with Umo that, because I maybe look a little bit younger, people really assume that I was hired for like the face, to be the face of Umo specifically.
To be the woman-owned Latina
brand.
Yeah.
Just for that. And there are times where people will say, "Oh, are you a brand ambassador? Are you like a bud tender brand ambassador?" And there are times people are like, "Oh, do you get upset at that?" And I'm like, "No, I'm the biggest brand ambassador of all. Like, I'm the brand ambassador." But also, it's important to know that I am a co-founder. I also wrote all the packaging on that. I also ideated the entire brand. I also lead all the press. I also do all the writing. So I think that I take it. While it sometimes feels negative, or maybe the intentions of what is being said to me may be negative, it's important that the way I'm taking it, I'm shifting it whenever it's to me. So if people are saying and they want to hurt me and say, "Oh, you're a bud tender," or "You're a I'm like, I was a bud tender proudly. I am a brand ambassador, but I'm also the co-founder of this brand.
Awesome.
Yeah. And when that's like an intentional, like it's like, again, you feel inferior around me right now. Like when I was in sports, people would ask, "Oh, are you a dancer?" Like, not quite, but I do help manage them. So, you have to just kind of be a jester with it.
Right. You have to be graceful at the end of the day. I think that I if anything, I'd be just being older and knowing where these comments are coming from has been a big learning lesson, because I think younger, you hear things and you're like, well, why is this person being like this? Now I'm older and I'm like, oh, this person's being this way because they're internalizing, or maybe I intimidate them, or maybe it's projection. Exactly. Yeah. So that way, I think just being older and understanding the reasons behind, certain attitudes towards me has helped me navigate, because it's not what they say, it's how I deal with it and how I, am able to make something out of it or not,
Yeah.
Yeah, what is like the 4 agreements? One of them is don't take anything personally.
Correct.
Right? And I think that's so strong in business because
it's hard.
It's almost impossible.
Right.
But the less you take personally, and I always just like try and understand, something that's happening in their life, or even I tell my daughter, when she's at school and girls are saying stuff, I'm like, that girl probably has, something else that's going on internally that is making that happen. It has nothing to do with you.
Right.
And she's adopted that concept. And I'm so proud of that, because she's 10 years old, and I mean, she's an amazing human being, and she really understands that, and her self-confidence from that. Yeah. And so I love empowering women to really have success in whatever industry they're in. And I think it's important that we all talk about it so that they can understand the tools that they need to succeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can also stare at them blankly, like you heard nothing.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites, until they're confused.
You're so
Yeah.
cool, though. Like, nobody's that cool. You're so cool. Like,
It's hard when you deal with it so much. I think you've dealt with it so much
Yeah.
that you have this
I
strategy.
have so many strategies.
And I think that, I still deal with that
I know
all the
how to
time.
successfully objectify a man and make him question why he treats women like that too. I'm very good at that as well.
And even with Umo, like before Umo and Mota Glass, I was a consultant on social media marketing as a whole. And a lot of the times, I would consult or pitch a contract or proposal, and they'd be not really understanding what I do or saying that I don't understand what I do.
Mhm.
But when I launched Umo and Mota Glass started getting in the big press, that's when people were like, oh, we didn't understand that that's what you did. And it's like PR and marketing, dude. But when I was pitching without this, it wasn't recognized. And so it's really interesting that sometimes, Forbes features really make people understand, like, oh,
Well,
okay.
it gives you the legitimacy, and sometimes as a woman, it's a little bit harder to get the benefit of the doubt initially. You kind of have to like prove yourself. But even as a lawyer, they're like, what, like when it comes time to pay the bill, it's like, you did nothing. It's like, actually, I saved your ass. So let's let's be real about it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think that especially when it comes to money and contracts and all that kind of stuff, it's an added challenge for for women. And thankfully, I do feel like it's like changing, and I see that. But I think it's good that we talk about it and we continue to have a just an education, because if we don't have these conversations, nobody will.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
And women, they're beautiful, but they're also talented, and they're also geniuses, and they also can, have tremendous, business acumen and have just decision-making skills, and they're so multifaceted. So if you see a gorgeous woman, don't take her for just that. There might be a lot that she has to offer. She might have an MBA, get to know her more.
Yeah. Yeah. The same benefit of the doubt that you would give like any man, whether he was attractive or not.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, closing out, thank you, Susie, so much for coming. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you and to hear your story. And hopefully we can, continue to have these discussions. I think, I really enjoyed talking to you and listening.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys so much. I mean, this is amazing. We could be here for 4 hours breaking
I know.
breaking down the cannabis
Literally,
industry.
like if this was a Joe Rogan podcast, we'd be here for like 4 hours for
Oh
sure.
man,
Yeah,
I
there's
mean,
so much
yeah.
to talk about. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we'll do the
Except no
extended
yelling
version.
and no pontificating here.
Yeah, right, exactly. The
Yeah.
female perspective.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Patience, just respect. It's much better when women are involved. Always.
Collaboration. Yeah,
Yeah.
sharing the space and the time and the energy, absolutely.
Mhm.
And lifting each other up rather than cutting each other down.
That
Yeah.
part.
For
Yeah.
sure.
That part.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies.
Yeah.
Yay,
thank
I feel so
you.
warm and fuzzy. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you at the next one. It's been great. We've been here with Susie, Maytal, and myself, Tammy, aka the Cannabis Cutie. Until next time, peace.